The blue light of my computer screen was the only thing standing between me and the suffocating darkness of my apartment. But it was the notification on my phone that truly stopped my heart. I had just sent the city's most dangerous death file to a stranger, and instead of a wrong number apology, he replied with a high-definition photo of my own front door, taken only seconds ago. "You just became my 9 p.m. appointment," the message read. "I am Anita, an investigative archivist who spent years cataloging the sins of the powerful, but I had finally made the one mistake I couldn't undo." My fingers trembled against the cold glass of the screen as a second text appeared. "Don't bother locking the deadbolt, Anita. I'm already in the elevator." Outside, the rain began to lash against the glass, a frantic rhythm that matched the hammering in my chest. I had intended to send that encrypted ledger to a whistleblower, a man who could save me. Instead, I had delivered it directly to Kalen Vane, the underworld's most ruthless fixer. He was the man they hired to make problems disappear, and because of one accidental tap, I was the biggest problem on his list. Before we continue our story, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe button, and really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. I stared at the read, receipt, watching the 3 dots of a typing indicator dance like a digital heartbeat. My apartment, once my sanctuary of archives and ancient paper, suddenly felt like a glass cage. Every shadow in the corner seemed to stretch toward me, and the hum of my servers sounded like a countdown. I had spent my entire career being a ghost, a woman who lived in the margins of other people's data, ensuring that the secrets of the corrupt stayed filed away where they couldn't hurt anyone. Or so I thought. But the death file I'd stumbled upon changed everything. It wasn't just a list of financial bribes. It was a roadmap of scheduled executions, a ledger of lives marked for deletion. And I had just handed it to the chief eraser. Panic surged, cold and sharp, through my veins. I scrambled to my feet, my chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. I had to move. I had to hide. But where do you go when a man coming for you already has a picture of your front door? I reached for my external hard drive, my fingers fumbling with the wires, desperate to take my leverage with me. If I was going down, I wouldn't go empty-handed. But as I yanked the cable free, the light in the hallway flickered. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant chime of the elevator at the end of the hall. Ding! The sound felt like a gunshot in the quiet of the 9 p.m. hour. I stood frozen in the center of my living room, the glowing monitors casting long, distorted shadows of my silhouette against the wall. I looked like a victim in a noir film, the girl who knew too much and did too little. I checked my phone one last time, hoping, praying that I had misread the contact info. But there it was. The number I had intended for a hidden whistleblower had been off by a single digit. That one digit had bridged the gap between a hero and a monster. My screen lit up again. No text this time, just a live location pin that sat directly on top of my building. A heavy, rhythmic thud echoed from the hallway. Not the sound of a frantic intruder, but the measured, confident stride of a man who knew exactly where he was going and knew that no one would dare stop him. He wasn't running because he didn't have to. I was a problem, and in Kalen Vane's world, problems didn't have legs, they only had solutions. I backed away from the door, my heart leaping into my throat as the handle began to turn. I hadn't even locked it. Why would I? In this neighborhood, the locks were mostly for show, and against a man like Vane, they were as useless as paper. The door swung open with a slow, deliberate creak. The man who stepped through the frame was exactly as the legends described, and yet infinitely more terrifying in the flesh. Kalen Vane stood well over 6 feet, draped in a charcoal overcoat that still held the glistening beads of the autumn rain. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a CEO who had just finished a late-night merger, except for the cold, predatory stillness in his eyes. He didn't look at my furniture or my expensive server racks. He looked directly at me, his gaze scanning my face with the clinical detachment of a butcher evaluating a cut of meat. He held up his phone, the screen showing our text thread. "Anita," he said, his voice a low, melodic baritone that sent a shiver of pure dread down my spine. You have a very interesting way of introducing yourself. Most people send a resume. You send a confession. I tried to speak, but my throat was a desert. I clutched the hard drive to my chest like a shield. It was a mistake. I finally managed to whisper. Vane took a step into the room, and the air seemed to vanish with him. He moved with a predatory grace, closing the distance until I could smell the faint scent of rain and expensive cedarwood. He tilted his head slightly, a small, mirthless smile playing at the corners of his mouth. In my line of work, Anita, there are no mistakes. There are only liabilities and assets. Currently, you're holding a file that makes you the biggest liability in this zip code. He reached out, not for me, but for the phone still clutched in my shaking hand. His fingers were gloved in soft leather, his touch firm as he pried the device from my grasp. He looked at the sent file, his expression unreadable. This data doesn't belong to you, and the people I work for are very protective of their property. I haven't told anyone else. I blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in my rush to survive. I didn't upload it to the cloud. It's only here. I can delete it. I can make it like it never happened. Vane leaned in closer, his shadow swallowing mine. That's the thing about digital footprints, Anita. They never really wash away. And once a problem is identified, it has to be handled. He signaled toward the door, and two more men in dark suits appeared from the shadows of the hallway. They didn't say a word. They simply began disconnecting my equipment with practiced efficiency. Everything I had built, every secret I had archived, was being stripped away in seconds. Where are you taking me? I asked, my voice cracking. Vane tucked my phone into his pocket and looked me in the eye. To a place where we can decide which category you fall into. Asset or liability. Let's hope for your sake, you're as smart as your archives say you are. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned on his heel and walked out, expecting me to follow. And I did. Because when Kalen Vane tells you that you're a problem, the only thing more dangerous than going with him is staying behind. As I stepped out into the rain-slicked night and into the back of a waiting black sedan, I knew the Anita who cataloged secrets was dead. The Anita who had to survive them was just beginning to wake up. The interior of the black sedan was a vacuum of sound, insulated so perfectly that the heavy downpour outside looked like a silent film playing against the tinted windows. I sat as far from Kalen Vane as the leather bench allowed, clutching my laptop bag to my chest as if the hardware inside could still protect me. Vane didn't speak. He simply watched the city lights blur into long, neon streaks. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressurized by the sheer presence of the man beside me. I realized then that I wasn't being arrested. I was being extracted. In the world of an investigative archivist, extraction was a euphemism for the moments before a person was permanently deleted from the record. Where are we going? I finally whispered, my voice sounding thin and alien even to my own ears. Vane didn't turn his head. To a place where the walls don't have ears and the neighbors don't have cameras. Your apartment was a security sieve, Anita. You were cataloging the world's most dangerous secrets behind a door that could be kicked in by a toddler. I was careful. I defended weakly, though the irony of my situation tasted like ash in my mouth. I had been careful for 5 years, yet one digit, one singular, misplaced character on a touchscreen, had brought the most feared fixer in the underworld into my living room. Careful is a word people use right before they get caught, Vane remarked, his gaze finally shifting to me. His eyes were the color of flint, cold and sparking with a terrifying intelligence. You didn't just find a ledger. You found the black book of the syndicate that keeps this city running. My employer spent 3 years and 4 lives ensuring that data stayed buried. And you? You treated it like a casual Friday project. The car began to climb, the engine purring as we ascended the winding roads toward the heights, the part of the city where the glass towers touched the clouds and the residents looked down on the rest of us like ants. We pulled into a private subterranean garage, the heavy steel gates clanging shut behind us with a finality that made my stomach drop. This was the fortress. Vane stepped out of the car and waited, a silent command for me to follow. We moved toward a private elevator that required both a biometric scan and a physical key. As the lift shot upward, the pressure in my ears increased, matching the rising panic in my chest. When the doors opened, I wasn't met with a torture chamber or a cold concrete room. Instead, I stepped into a sprawling, minimalist penthouse that smelled of expensive rain and ozone. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the storm-lashed skyline. "Sit," Vane commanded, gesturing toward a sleek, low-profile sofa. He didn't join me. Instead, he walked over to a high-tech console at the center of the room. Two of his men, who had followed us in a separate car, began setting up my servers on a marble table with terrifying efficiency. They handled my equipment with more respect than they had handled me. "I've spent the last hour running a background check on you, Anita," Vane said, his back still turned. "University of Zurich. A master's in information architecture. A vanished digital footprint 3 years ago. You've been living as a ghost, working as a freelance archivist for discreet clients. You're good. Better than the people usually tasked with finding this kind of data. I just wanted to make sure the right people saw the truth," I said, trying to find my spine. Vane turned around, holding my phone in his hand. "The truth is a luxury you can't afford. The people I work for don't care about the truth. They care about the ledger. And right now, that ledger is sitting on your hard drive, which makes you a walking death warrant. My instructions were very clear. Handle the breach. Usually, that means the person responsible is found in the river by morning." I felt the blood drain from my face. The room seemed to tilt. Then why am I here? Why are my servers here? Vane walked toward me, stopping just inches away. He leaned down, his face level with mine. The scent of his cedarwood cologne was intoxicating and deadly. "Because when I look at the file you sent me, I noticed something you didn't. You didn't just find the ledger. You found the back doors. You found the encrypted signatures of the people who stole it in the first place." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "The ledger didn't leak by accident, Anita. It was moved. Someone within the syndicate wanted it found. And they wanted it found by someone like you. Someone smart enough to decode it, but powerless enough to be silenced. They were using you as a courier to frame me for the security failure." My mind raced. I thought back to the anonymous tip that had led me to the file in the first place. I had thought I was being a hero, but I was just a pawn in a power struggle I didn't understand. The whistleblower, the contact who gave me the access codes. They told me they were a victim. They were an architect, Vane corrected. He walked back to the servers and tapped a screen. "They wanted me to kill you the moment I got that text. They expected me to react like a blunt instrument. Find the leak, eliminate the source, and return the hardware. By the time I realized the data was tainted, I would have been the prime suspect in a double cross." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than cold detachment in his eyes. It was curiosity. "But you sent that text to me, not to the whistleblower. You broke their script, Anita. And now, the only way I survive this is if you help me find out who actually opened that door." "You want me to work for you?" I asked, breathless. "I want you to be the solution to the problem you created," Vane said. "You have 6 hours before my employers expect a confirmation that you've been handled. In that time, you're going to use those archives of yours to find the ghost who set us both up. If you succeed, you get a new life, a new name, and my protection. If you fail..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The handled part was already understood. "I need coffee," I said, my voice finally regaining some of its strength. "And I need full access to your local network. If they framed you, they did it from the inside. I need to see your security logs." Vane gave a sharp, appreciative nod to his men. "Get her whatever she needs. And Anita..." I looked up at him as I reached for my keyboard, the familiar feel of the keys providing a small anchor in the storm. "Don't try to send another text," he warned softly. "I'm the only friend you have left in this city, and I'm a very dangerous man to lose." As my fingers began to fly across the keys, the adrenaline finally kicked in, replacing the fear with a cold, sharp focus. I was no longer just an observer. I was a player. And in Kalen Vane's world, the only way to stop being a problem was to become the most dangerous person in the room. The high-security penthouse felt less like a home and more like a command center for a silent war. As the elevator doors hissed shut behind me, I was struck by the sheer coldness of the architecture. Brushed steel, obsidian marble, and glass that seemed to hold the storm at bay without reflecting a single drop of rain. Kalen Vane stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette cutting a sharp, dark figure against the flickering lightning of the city below. He didn't look back as I approached the marble table where his men had finished mounting my server racks. They had integrated my chaotic, home-built rigs into a clean, high-speed fiber optic interface that made my previous connection feel like a dial-up modem from the 90s. "You have 30 minutes to prove you aren't a waste of my resources, Anita," Vane said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, open space. He turned, and the light from a nearby monitor caught the edge of a silver watch, a ticking reminder that my life was currently measured in seconds. My employers are not known for their patience. They expect a cleanup, not a collaboration. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs, but my hands were steady. This was my domain. I sat in the ergonomic chair, which felt far too expensive for a woman who had been worried about rent an hour ago, and began the login sequence. The familiar green glow of the terminal was the only comfort I had. I pulled up the death file, the encrypted ledger that had started this nightmare, and began to peel back the layers of its metadata. "I need to know who gave you the access codes," Vane prompted, stepping closer. He stood behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. It was an intimidating presence, intended to keep me off balance, but it only sharpened my focus. "They used an encrypted relay," I murmured, my fingers dancing across the keys. "A ghost box based in Eastern Europe, but that's just a mask. No one who steals a ledger this high profile is that amateur. They wanted me to see the mask. They wanted me to think I was working with a low-level whistleblower." I paused, squinting at a string of hex code that looked out of place. "Wait, look at this." I highlighted a section of the root directory. It was a hidden tracker, a digital ping that sent a silent signal every time the file was opened. This file wasn't just sent to me. It's broadcasting. Whoever gave this to me is watching us right now. They know exactly where this data is sitting. Vane's eyes narrowed, his posture shifting from relaxed curiosity to combat readiness. "Can they see the location?" "They're trying to," I said, my pulse quickening. "But your penthouse has a rotating IP shield. They're hitting a wall, which is why they're getting aggressive." As if on cue, a red warning flashed across my screen. A brute force attack was being launched against Vane's private network. "They aren't just whistleblowers, Kalen. They're hackers. And they're trying to burn your server from the outside to erase the evidence of their own entry." Vane leaned over me, one hand resting on the back of my chair, the other on the desk. He was so close I could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Stop them. I'm trying, but they're using a polymorphic worm. Every time I block an entry point, it rewrites its own code and finds a new one." I felt a sweat bead slide down my temple. If they breached the network, they'd wipe the drive, and Vane would have no choice but to handle me to satisfy his bosses. I was fighting for my life with every keystroke. Suddenly, I saw it, a tiny infinitesimal flaw in the worm's logic. It was a signature I'd seen once before, years ago, in a deep dive archival project for a defunct intelligence agency. "I know this handiwork," I whispered. "This isn't an outside job. This code, it was written to bypass Vane security protocols specifically. It's using your own encryption keys against you." Vane's grip on the chair tightened. "That's impossible. Only 3 people have those keys, and I'm one of them. Then one of the other 2 is trying to kill you," I said, looking up at him. The gravity of the situation hit us both at once. This wasn't just a leak. It was an internal coup. The accidental text hadn't just put me in danger. It had exposed a knife at Vane's throat. I turned back to the screen, my mind working at a speed I didn't know I possessed. I didn't just block the attack. I opened a honeypot, a fake directory that looked like the ledger but was actually a vacuum. The moment the worm entered the trap, it would get stuck in an infinite loop, allowing me to trace the signal back to its source. "I've got the trace," I shouted as the progress bar hit 90%. "It's coming from within the city, a secure facility in the financial district, the Apex Group headquarters." Vane's face went stone cold. That's my employer's primary office. The man who hired me to find you is the one currently trying to hack into my home. He didn't hire you to find me, Kaylin, I said, the realization chilling me to the bone. He hired you to be the fall guy. He wanted you to find the thief, eliminate her, and then he would discover the ledger in your possession, making it look like you were the one who stole it for leverage. My accidental text just forced him to accelerate the plan. Vane stood up straight, his eyes burning with a dark, dangerous fire. He looked at the two guards by the door. Prepare the cars. We're moving. Moving where? I asked, stumbling as I stood up. To the only place where we can survive the night, Vane said, grabbing his overcoat. He turned to me, and for a split second, the predator vanished, replaced by a man who recognized a fellow survivor. You just saved my life, Anita. Now, let's see if you can help me take back mine. He reached out, offering his hand. It wasn't a command this time. It was an invitation. I looked at the monitors, where the red warnings had turned to a steady, calm blue, and then back at the man who was supposed to be my executioner. I took his hand. The touch was firm, grounding, and for the first time since I hit send on that fatal text, I felt like I might actually see the sunrise. What's the plan? I asked. Vane pulled me toward the elevator, a grim smile finally touching his lips. We're going to show them that when you try to handle a problem like me, you'd better not miss. As the elevator descended, I realized I was no longer a ghost in the archives. I was the heartbeat of Counter-Strike. The game had changed, and for once, I was the one holding the deck. The elevator plummeted toward the garage, but my mind was still stuck in the digital ether of the penthouse. The transition from the high-altitude luxury of the heights to the enclosed, metallic silence of the subterranean level felt like being plunged into ice water. Kaylin Vane moved with a focused, lethal energy that forced everyone around him to sharpen their own edges. As we stepped out into the garage, his men were already positioning a different vehicle, a matte black SUV with reinforced plating and windows so dark they looked like voids. We aren't going to the financial district yet, Vane said, his voice dropping an octave as he scanned the perimeter of the garage. If the Apex group is monitoring my network, they've already flagged my biometric exit from the building. We need a blind spot. The gilded cage, I murmured, clutching the encrypted drive Vane had handed me back. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. That's what I call the high-security district. Everyone thinks they're safe because there are cameras on every corner, but as an archivist, I know the truth. Those cameras don't protect you. They just record your disappearance. Vane opened the heavy rear door of the SUV and ushered me inside. The interior smelled of leather and gun oil. Exactly, which is why we're going to a secondary location, a place they can't see. My private doctor is already on standby at the safe house. He'll look at that cut on your hand and verify the drive's integrity while I reestablish our comms. As the SUV roared to life and surged out into the rain-slicked streets, I realized I was no longer a guest. I was a valuable asset in a war I hadn't declared. The city blurred past us, a kaleidoscope of neon and gray. Vane sat opposite me, a tablet in his hand, his eyes reflecting the rapid scroll of data. He looked up, catching me staring. You're thinking about the exit strategy, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm thinking about the fact that I'm sitting in an armored tank with a man who was supposed to kill me an hour ago. I replied, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. And I'm wondering if the safe house is actually just a place where it's easier to bury a body. Vane didn't smile, but the tension in his jaw relaxed slightly. If I wanted you dead, Anita, I would have left you in your apartment. The Apex Group's cleanup crew arrived there 4 minutes after we left. My sensors picked up the breach. They didn't come to talk. They came with incendiaries to wipe the archives and anyone inside them. The reality of his words hit me like a physical blow. My apartment, my books, my servers, the life I had meticulously built in the shadows, was likely a smoking ruin. Everything I owned was now contained in the laptop bag at my feet and the man sitting across from me. Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why go to all this trouble for a problem? Vane leaned forward, the shadows of the passing streetlights dancing across his sharp features. Because you found the one thing I couldn't, the signature. I've known there was a mole in Apex for months, but they were too clean. They used my own shadows against me. But they didn't account for a girl who treats data like a forensic crime scene. You didn't just find the ledger, you found the ghost in the machine. The SUV took a sharp turn, descending into a nondescript industrial area near the docks. We pulled into a warehouse that looked abandoned from the outside, but as the rolling steel doors shut behind us, a bank of floodlights flickered on, revealing a state-of-the-art medical suite and a high-end tech lab hidden behind shipping containers. A man in a white lab coat, looking far too exhausted for the hour, stepped forward. "Vane, you're late." "The situation evolved, Eris," Vane said, stepping out and gesturing for me to do the same. "This is Anita. She's the key. Check the drive, then check her. I want a full sweep for any subdermal trackers. They might have slipped her if they got close at the apartment." I felt a surge of indignation. They didn't get close enough to tag me. "They got close enough to send you a photo of your front door," Vane countered, his eyes locking onto mine. "In my world, that's close enough to be fatal. Eris, do it now." For the next hour, I was subjected to a clinical, efficient examination. Eris was a man of few words, his hands steady as he scanned me with a handheld device that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi film. He cleaned the small gash on my palm, a souvenir from the jagged edge of my server rack, and handed me a glass of water that tasted faintly of electrolytes. While Eris worked, Vane was a whirlwind of activity in the tech lab. I watched him through the glass partition. He was stripping down his own equipment, dumping phones into a lead line bin, and bringing a fresh set of encrypted hardware online. He looked like a man preparing for a siege. "The drive is clean," Eris finally announced, looking over at Vane. "And she's not tagged, but she is exhausted. Her cortisol levels are spiking. She can sleep when the ledger is rewritten," Vane said, walking back into the medical suite. He looked at me, and for the first time, his expression held a flicker of something resembling respect. "Eris is right about one thing. You're the key, but you're also a target. My employer, the man who runs Apex, his name is Julian Thorne. He doesn't just want the ledger back. He wants the person who can read the signatures." "Thorne," I repeated, the name tasting like poison. I had seen that name in the archives. He was a philanthropist, a pillar of the community, and apparently, a man who hired fixers to kill archivists. "He thinks he's the architect of this city," Vane said, his voice cold and hard. "He thinks he can handle me and discard you. But he made a mistake. He brought us together. He handed me a new device, a sleek, transparent glass tablet. I've uploaded the internal Apex logs Eris managed to skim before the lockout. I need you to find a link. Find the moment Thorne decided to turn the ledger into a trap." I took the tablet. The cool surface felt like a heavy weight. I looked around the safe house, the gilded cage, and realized that while the walls were reinforced and the technology was cutting edge, I was still a prisoner of circumstances. But as I looked at Vane, I realized he was right. We were both problems that Thorne had tried to handle. "I'll find it," I said, my voice firming. "But Kalen, when this is over, I don't want to go back to being a ghost." Vane paused, his hand on the doorframe. He looked back at me, the predator's glint replaced by a dark, knowing smile. "Anita, after tonight, there won't be enough shadows left in this city for you to hide in. You're with me now." As I turned my attention to the glass tablet, the first line of code scrolling past, I knew he was right. The archivist was gone. The architect was beginning to build something new, a revenge that would burn the gilded cage to the ground. The industrial chill of the warehouse seeped into my bones as I stared at the glass tablet, the blue light reflecting in my eyes like a digital ghost. Eris had moved to the back of the lab to monitor the building's external sensors, leaving me alone with the silence and the data. But the silence didn't last. Kalen Vane appeared at my side, his footsteps as silent as a shadow. He didn't say a word, but the weight of his presence was an unspoken demand for progress. "I found it," I said, my voice cracking slightly from the hours of concentrated strain. I swiped a finger across the tablet, projecting a series of hidden logs onto a larger monitor on the wall. You were right about the frame-up, but it's deeper than just an internal coup. Look at these timestamps. I pointed to a series of encrypted pings that predated my accidental text by 48 hours. Julian Thorne didn't just wait for a leak. He created a shadow copy of the ledger and placed it in a low-security archive he knew I was monitoring for my other clients. He baited the hook with the death file, knowing an archivist with my profile would find it and try to move it. Vane stepped closer, his eyes tracking the code. He chose you specifically. Why? Because of my connection to the whistleblower network, I explained, pulling up another file. He needed the data to look like it was heading toward the press, so he could justify handling the situation with extreme prejudice. But here's the real twist, Kalen. Look at the geolocation of the final ping before I hit send. I zoomed in on a map of the city. A small red dot pulsed over a luxury high-rise in the north end. This is where the whistleblower was logged in when they gave me the access codes. It's not a safe house. It's a penthouse owned by a holding company called Vesper Alpha. Vane's jaw tightened, a muscle leaping in his cheek. Vesper Alpha is one of my shell companies. That's my secondary residence. Someone was inside my home, using my own hardware to contact you. And that someone, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs, wasn't just trying to frame you. They were hunting me. I pulled up a grainy, black and white image captured by a doorbell camera 3 blocks from my apartment, dated only 3 hours ago. It showed a man in a dark hoodie carrying a heavy tactical backpack. That's the whistleblower. He wasn't waiting for the file to go public. He was waiting for me to leave my apartment so he could snatch me. Vane reached out and touched the screen, his fingers hovering over the image of the backpack. That's a kidnap kit. Zip ties, sedative, a burner passport. I know that gear. It's standard issue for Thorne's private security. The room felt like it was shrinking. The realization that I had been watched, not just by a stranger, but by a professional predator, turned my blood to ice. I wasn't just a witness. I was a piece of evidence that Thorne needed to disappear. Vane turned to me, his expression unreadable. He didn't just want the ledger back, Anita. He wanted you as leverage against me. If he had you, he could force me to take the fall for the entire money laundering scheme. You weren't a mistake. You were the leash he was going to put around my neck. He walked over to a steel locker and pulled out a tactical vest, beginning to strap it over his charcoal shirt with practiced movements. The transition from the problem solver to a soldier was instantaneous and terrifying. He's been stalking you for days, waiting for the perfect moment to make you a ghost. My arrival at your apartment didn't just ruin his frame-up, it stole his prize. So what do we do? I asked, standing up. I felt small in the vast warehouse, surrounded by guns and glass, but the fire of indignation was finally beginning to burn away the fog of fear. If Thorne has all this power, if he's already inside your network, how do we fight back? Vane stopped, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was no distance in his gaze. There was a grim, dark partnership. We don't fight in the shadows anymore, Anita. That's where he's strongest. We're going to step into the light and show him exactly what kind of problem he created. He gestured to the glass tablet. Can you bypass the Vesper Alpha encryption if I get you close enough to the physical server? If I'm on a local area network, I can rewrite the entire security protocol in 10 minutes. I said, my voice gaining a hard edge. Good, because Thorne thinks he's playing a game of chess. He thinks he's moved his queen. Vane stepped toward me, his voice a low, dangerous hum. He doesn't realize that the archivist he tried to kidnap is about to rewrite his entire history. Vane, Ayers called out from the lab, his voice urgent. Sensors just tripped at the perimeter. 2 black sedans, no plates. They found the warehouse. Vane didn't blink. He reached out and grabbed my laptop bag, handing it to me. Time to go, Anita. Thorne is tired of waiting. Let's show him that some problems don't just go away, they hit back. As we ran toward the back exit where the armored SUV waited, I didn't look back at the monitors. I didn't need to. I knew the data by heart. I was no longer the girl who cataloged secrets. I was the secret that was about to destroy Julian Thorne. The problem solver and the archivist were moving out, and for the first time, the city felt like it belonged to us. The roar of the SUV's engine drowned out the sound of the first shots hitting the warehouse's reinforced doors. Kalen Vane didn't flinch. He drove with a cold, surgical precision, weaving the heavy vehicle through the labyrinth of shipping containers as the two black sedans barreled into the loading bay behind us. I gripped the door handle, my knuckles white, watching the rearview mirror as flashes of muzzle fire sparked in the darkness. "Stay down," Vane commanded, his voice devoid of panic. He slammed the wheel to the left, drifting the armored beast around a stack of rusted crates. Eris has a secondary exit blocked with a remote detonation charge. Once we're clear, they won't be following us for a while. A dull thud vibrated through the chassis, followed by a roar of collapsing metal behind us. The warehouse fell away into a cloud of dust and fire. We were back in the rain, the tires screaming against the wet asphalt as we headed toward the heart of the city. For a few minutes, the only sound was the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers. "I need a contract," I said suddenly. The words felt heavy, but necessary. Vane glanced at me, his brow furrowing. "A contract? I'm not just a problem anymore, and I'm tired of being a guest in safe houses," I said, meeting his gaze. "If I'm going into Vesper Alpha, if I'm going to rewrite Thorne's history, I want it in writing. After tonight, I need a new identity, a clean slate, and I want the archival rights to the Apex Ledger. If I'm going to be your partner, I'm not doing it on a handshake." A small, genuine smirk touched Vane's lips. "Negotiating for your life while being hunted by a private army. You really are more than an archivist, Anita." He reached into the glove compartment and tossed a small, encrypted tablet onto my lap. "It's already drafted. Digital signature only. It grants you full immunity within my network and a severance package that would keep you in the Heights for a decade. Sign it, and you're officially off the handling list." I didn't hesitate. I swiped my thumb across the biometric sensor. The screen glowed green, agreement finalized. "Now," Vane said, his tone shifting back to business. "The Vesper Alpha penthouse is the only place Thorne can't reach with a remote wipe. He needs his physical key to authorize the final purge of the money laundering data. He's headed there now because he thinks he's trapped us in the warehouse. He wants to clean the house before he calls the authorities to report your accidental death." "Where do we get in?" I asked. "If it's your secondary residence, he'll have the lobby flagged." "We don't go through the lobby," Vane said, pulling the SUV into a dark alleyway 2 blocks from the high-rise. He pointed upward through the rain-streaked sunroof. The penthouse loomed like a jagged tooth against the clouds. There's a service elevator for the helipad. It's on an analog circuit, no digital footprint. But once we're on the floor, the security will be Thorne's elite team. I'll clear the path. You just focus on the server. We exited the vehicle, the cold rain soaking into my jacket instantly. Vane handed me a lightweight tactical earpiece. "This stays on. If I tell you to run, you don't look back." "Understood. I don't plan on running," I said, adjusting the strap on my laptop bag. "I plan on finishing this." We moved through the shadows of the alley, entering a nondescript maintenance door. The service elevator was cramped and smelled of grease and old metal. As we ascended, Vane checked his weapon, his movements fluid and robotic. He looked at me, seeing the way my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer surge of adrenaline. 30 floors to the truth, Anita, he whispered as the elevator jolted. "Thorne thinks he's the architect of this city, but he forgot one thing about archives." "What's that?" I asked. "The person who holds the files decides who gets remembered and who gets erased." The elevator chimed, a soft, haunting sound. The door slid open to reveal a dimly lit hallway. Vane stepped out first, his gun raised. The silence was absolute, but the air felt charged. This was Vesper Alpha, the place where the whistleblower had tried to snatch me, and the place where Julian Thorne's empire would begin to crumble. "Go," Vane signaled. "The server room is behind the library. I'll hold the foyer." I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just hiding in the shadows anymore. I was moving through them like a blade. I reached the heavy oak doors of the library and slipped inside. The room was filled with the scent of old paper and expensive leather, a paradise for an archivist. But tonight, it was a battlefield. At the far end of the room, a glass partition glowed with the soft blue light of the Vesper Alpha core. I set my laptop down and plugged into the physical port. The screen flickered to life, and the encrypted ledger appeared, vulnerable and raw. "I'm in, Kalen," I whispered into the earpiece. "Make it count," his voice crackled back. Because Thorne just pulled into the garage. My fingers hit the keys. The negotiation was over. The counterstrike had officially begun. I began to rewrite the signatures, stripping Thorne's name from the protection protocols and replacing them with a trail of digital breadcrumbs that led directly to his private accounts. I wasn't just handling the problem. I was becoming the architect of his ruin. The library was a tomb of silent knowledge, but the air inside the server room was humming with electric heat. I could hear the muffled thuds of heavy doors closing down in the foyer, followed by the sharp, rhythmic clicking of tactical boots on marble. Julian Thorne had arrived, and he wasn't alone. "Anita, he's in the elevator," Kalen's voice rasped through my earpiece. I'm moving to the gallery to pinch their line of sight. "How much longer?" "I'm hitting a firewall," I whispered, my fingers flying across the glass tablet. He didn't just lock the files, he tethered them to a heartbeat sensor. If I force the override, it triggers a wipe. I have to spoof his biometric signature. "Then do it now. I can hear them." I took a deep breath, pulling up the high-resolution photo of Thorne I'd archived weeks ago for a different client. Using a rendering tool, I mapped his retinal patterns and projected them into the server's optical scanner. The red light turned amber. Pending. My heart was thumping so hard I feared the server would pick up my pulse as an intrusion. "Anita," Kalen's voice was lower now, barely a breath. "They're outside the library. I'm engaging." A sudden, sharp crack of suppressed gunfire erupted from the hallway. I flinched, but I didn't look away from the screen. This was the moment. If I failed here, Kalen's protection meant nothing. I had to lure the predator into the open. I opened a secure, unlisted VoIP line and dialed the burner number Thorne had used to coordinate my handling. On the third ring, he picked up. The silence on the other end was cold, calculated. "Julian," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I know you're in the building. I also know you're holding a kill command for this server. But before you press it, you might want to look at the screen in your hand." I heard a sharp intake of breath over the line. In the distance, the gunfire stopped. "Who is this?" Thorne's voice was like grinding stones, sophisticated yet brutal. "The problem you tried to handle," I replied. "I've just rerouted the Vesper Alpha ledger through an offshore relay. If you wipe this server, the relay triggers a public dump to every major news outlet and the federal tax authorities. You won't just be losing your money, Julian. You'll be losing your freedom." "You're bluffing," he hissed. "You're an archivist. You don't have the stomach for this." "I spent 5 years watching people like you hide behind paperwork," I said, my eyes fixed on the progress bar. 98%. "I know exactly where the bodies are buried because I'm the one who filed the maps. I have the signatures. I have the death file you used to bait me. And right now, I'm rewriting the ledger to show that you were the one who authorized the hit on Kalen Vane. You're dead, girl. You and Vane both." "Maybe," I said, catching a glimpse of Kalen's shadow moving past the library's glass door, a silent wraith in the dark. "But I'm taking your empire with me. Unless you tell your men to stand down and give me the master decryption key." I was playing a dangerous game of chicken. I had no public dump ready. The relay was a shell I'd built in 5 minutes. I was using my intimate knowledge of his ego to bait him into a trap. Thorne lived for control. The thought of a nobody like me having the power to erase him was the one thing he couldn't handle. "I'm coming into that room," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And I'm going to watch the light leave your eyes." The line went dead. "Kalen," I whispered. "He's coming in. Alone. He thinks I'm the only one here." "I'm right behind him," Kalen replied. The heavy library doors groaned open. The smell of expensive rain and ozone followed a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit into the room. Julian Thorne looked exactly like his photos, except for the veins bulging in his neck and the silver pistol held with practiced ease. He didn't look at the shelves of books. He looked at me, sitting behind the glass partition, a small woman with a laptop who had dared to rewrite his world. "The key, Julian," I said, standing up. "Give it to me." And I might just leave a few shadows for you to hide in. He raised the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. You're a mistake that should have been handled hours ago. Then it's a good thing I'm a professional at fixing mistakes. A voice boomed from the shadows. Kalen Vane stepped into the light behind Thorn, his own weapon leveled to the back of Thorn's head. The problem solver had arrived to collect. The siren's call had worked. The predator was now the prey. The library was thick with his silence, so heavy it felt structural. Julian Thorn stood frozen, the silver pistol in his hand, suddenly looking like a toy against the backdrop of Kalen Vane's cold, unwavering stare. The power dynamic in the room hadn't just shifted, it had inverted. Thorn, the man who owned the skyline, was now a man cornered in his own sanctuary. "Drop it, Julian," Kalen said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration. "I've already neutralized your team in the hall. It's just us, the archivist, and the truth. And the truth is currently bleeding you dry." Thorn's eyes darted between the gun at his head and me, sitting behind the glass. His face, usually a mask of aristocratic composure, was contorting into something ugly and desperate. Slowly, he opened his fingers, letting the silver weapon clatter onto the hardwood floor. "You think this changes anything, Vane? You're a hired hand, a tool. You kill me, and the board will have you erased before the sun comes up." "The board only cares about the ledger," I said, standing up and stepping out from behind the server partition. I held the glass tablet out so he could see the scrolling lines of redirected data. "And right now, the ledger says you've been skimming from their offshore accounts for years to fund your own private interests. I didn't just find your signatures, Julian. I found the black box, the hidden accounts where you were moving the money before it reached the syndicate." Thorn's skin turned a sickly shade of gray. "That's impossible. No one can access those notes. An archivist can," I countered, my voice growing stronger. "You forgot that I spent 5 years organizing the very data you thought was buried. You treated your secrets like trash, but I treated them like a map." Kalen stepped forward, never lowering his weapon. He reached into Thorn's inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small, obsidian black device, the master decryption key. He tossed it to me without looking. "Finish it, Anita." I caught the key, its cold surface a sharp contrast to the heat of the server room. I plugged it into my laptop. The final encryption wall crumbled. The death file was no longer a threat. It was a confession. I didn't just delete the names of the targets. I replaced them with the names of the shell companies Thorn used to facilitate his crimes. I hit the execute command, and the data began its journey to the syndicate's central hub. "It's done," I whispered. Outside, the storm reached its peak, a flash of lightning illuminating the library and revealing a dark smudge on Kalen's charcoal sleeve. Blood. He had been hit during the breach, but he hadn't even flinched. He stood like a pillar of granite, watching as the man who had tried to play us both realized his game was over. "Vane, wait," Thorn pleaded, his voice cracking. "We can make a deal. I have more than what's in that ledger. I have assets in Europe and the islands. I'll give you everything if you just get me out of the city." Kalen looked at Thorn with a clinical sort of pity. "You're still talking like a man who has a choice, Julian. You didn't just hire me to handle a problem. You hired me to be the fall guy for your own greed. In my world, that's an unforgivable breach of contract." Kalen glanced at me, a silent question in his eyes. I knew what he was asking. In this world, there were no police, no courtrooms. There was only the problem solver and the resolution. "The syndicate is already receiving the update," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. "They'll be here in 20 minutes to recover their property. They don't like it when people steal from the family, Julian. Especially not one of their own." Vane lowered his gun slightly, but the threat remained. "You have 20 minutes to find a way to explain this to them. I suggest you start praying, though I doubt any god is listening to a man like you." Kalen turned to me, his expression softening just a fraction. "Pack your gear, Anita. We're leaving." "What about him?" I asked, looking at Thorn, who had collapsed into one of his expensive leather chairs, staring at the floor in a state of catatonic shock. "He's already a ghost," Kalen said. "He just doesn't know it yet." I gathered my laptop and my servers, the equipment that had been my only companion for so long. As we walked out of the library, Leaving Julian Thorne to face the monsters he had helped create, I felt a strange sense of closure. The apartment in the neon-drenched slums was gone, burned to the ground by a man who thought he could erase me. But standing next to Kalen Vane, I felt more real than I ever had. We moved through the gallery, past the fallen guards, and toward the private elevator. The rain was still lashing against the windows, but the air felt cleaner, as if the storm had finally washed away the filth of the conspiracy. Kalen pressed the button for the garage, his hand steady despite the wound on his arm. "You did good, Anita," he said as the elevator began its descent. "You weren't just the solution. You were the storm." I looked at him, the man who was supposed to be my executioner and was now my only ally. "So what happens now?" "The contract is signed. Does the problem solver go back to work?" Kalen looked at the silver watch on his wrist, the ticking a rhythmic reminder of the new life we had just forged. "The problem solver has a lot of cleaning up to do, and he's going to need an archivist who knows where all the maps are hidden." As the doors opened into the garage, I saw the black SUV waiting, its engine purring like a restless beast. I stepped out into the night, no longer a problem to be handled, but a partner in a world where secrets were the only currency that mattered. The ledger was closed, but our story was just beginning. The dawn began to bleed through the heavy gray clouds, painting the rain-slicked streets of the city in shades of bruised purple and pale gold. We sat in the back of the SUV, the engine idling in a quiet, high-end neighborhood miles away from the chaos of the penthouse. For the first time in 24 hours, the silence wasn't filled with the threat of death. It was the silence of a clean slate. Kalen leaned his head back against the leather headrest, his eyes closed. The adrenaline had finally ebbed, leaving behind the raw exhaustion of a man who had spent the night fighting a war on two fronts. He reached down and unbuttoned the cuff of his charcoal sleeve, revealing a shallow graze where a bullet had kissed the skin. "Eris will be at the new safe house in 10 minutes, Kalen said without opening his eyes. "He'll stitch that up, and he'll have the new documentation ready for you. By noon, Anita, the woman who lived in that apartment, won't exist on any government server in the world." I looked down at my hands. They were still stained with the dust of the warehouse and the faint ink of old archives, but they weren't shaking anymore. I reached into my bag and pulled out the glass tablet, watching the final confirmation of the ledger's delivery. Julian Thorne's empire was officially being dismantled by the very syndicate that had built it. He was no longer a player. He was a footnote. "Is this what it's like?" I asked softly, moving from one shadow to the next, waiting for the next problem to emerge. Kalen opened his eyes, turning his head to look at me. The predatory flint was still there, but it was tempered by something else, an acknowledgement of the woman sitting beside him. "It's what it's like for most. But you're not most people, Anita. You didn't just survive the night. You outmaneuvered a man who had the entire city in his pocket." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted key card, sliding it across the seat toward me. "The contract I signed in the SUV, it wasn't just for your protection. It was an invitation. I've spent years fixing problems with force because that's the only language the underworld speaks. But tonight showed me that the most powerful weapon isn't a gun. It's the information behind it." I picked up the key card. It was cold and heavy, a physical weight that represented a future I had never dared to imagine. "You want me to stay?" "I want you to lead," Kalen corrected. "I handle the physical threats. You handle the architecture. Together, we don't just solve problems, we prevent them. You'll have access to the most secure archives in the world. You'll be the ghost that even the ghosts are afraid of." I looked out the window at the waking city. People were starting to emerge from their homes, clutching umbrellas and coffee, heading to jobs that didn't involve death files or encrypted ledgers. A part of me craved that simplicity, the quiet life of an observer. But as I felt the weight of the key card in my palm, I realized that the girl who was content to just watch the world had died the moment she hit send on that text. "Thorne tried to handle me because he thought I was a liability," I said, a slow, determined smile spreading across my face. "He never realized that an archivist is the only one who truly knows how the story ends." "And how does the story end?" Kalen asked, his voice a low, intrigued baritone. "It doesn't," I replied, meeting his gaze. "You just get a new set of authors." The SUV pulled into the driveway of a secluded estate, the gates closing behind us with a heavy, rhythmic thud. As I stepped out into the morning air, I took a deep breath of the rain-washed wind. My apartment was gone. My old life was a memory. But as I walked toward the house with Kalen Vane at my side, I knew I wasn't a problem anymore. I was the solution. One mistaken text had brought a dangerous man to my door and surrounded my world with black cars and flying lead. But in that danger, I had found an unexpected sanctuary and a power I had never known I possessed. The archivist was gone. Long live the architect. One accidental text can change your entire life. It can turn a quiet archivist into the center of a criminal war, and it can turn a ruthless fixer into an ally. If you were on edge as Anita fought to rewrite Julian Thorne's history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more high-stakes thrillers. Your support helps me bring these intense stories to life. Let me know in the comments. What would you do if a stranger sent you a photo of your own front door? Until next time, stay sharp, keep your data encrypted, and stay mysterious.